Power makes men fearless until they meet someone they can't control. James Rockwell had bought off politicians, crushed competitors, and silenced critics with his billions. But as he sat in that courtroom, staring at the youngest judge he had ever seen, he had no idea. He was no longer in control, and for the first time in his life, money wouldn't save him. The courtroom was silent, a stillness thick with tension. James Rockwell, the billionaire real estate tycoon, sat casually reclined in his chair, his expensive suit unwrinkled, his diamond cufflinks gleaming. His smirk oozed confidence, the kind that comes from believing you are untouchable. He had been in dozens of courtrooms, but this was a joke. His gaze landed on the judge's bench, and his smirk widened. The woman sitting there, barely in her late 20s, was supposed to judge him? You? He said, letting out a deep, mocking laugh. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the court stenographer, a woman with decades of experience, froze mid-typing. The prosecutor's jaw clenched. Rockwell's own lawyer exhaled sharply, sensing his client had just made a mistake. But Rockwell didn't care. "This is rich," he chuckled, shaking his head. "I thought I walked into a real courtroom, not a daycare." His arrogance dripped from every word. He had seen plenty of judges before. Gray-haired, tired men who either feared him, owed him, or could be bought. But this was amusing. Judge Evelyn Carter didn't react. She didn't blush, stammer, or flinch like he expected. Instead, she studied him with calm detachment, like a lion watching a wounded gazelle. Then, slowly, she smiled. It was a small, knowing smile, not of amusement, but of certainty. And then she spoke, her voice cool, measured, and cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "Mr. Rockwell," she said, unbothered, "I suggest you choose your next words very carefully." The air shifted. Rockwell felt it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but the courtroom had turned against him. Even his own lawyer looked uneasy. For the first time in his entire life, James Rockwell felt slightly off balance, and he didn't like it. "Oh, really?" he scoffed, forcing another arrogant chuckle. "And what exactly do you think is going to happen if I don't?" Judge Carter leaned forward slightly, her fingers tapping lightly against the bench. "Then you will regret it," she said, her voice unshaken. Instantly. And just like that, the room turned cold. For the first time, Rockwell's smirk faltered, because for the first time, he wasn't the one in control. 3 months earlier, James Rockwell ruled his empire from the top of his penthouse office, untouchable, unstoppable. His real estate empire had turned a billion-dollar profit last quarter alone. He didn't believe in kindness. He believed in winning. So when his assistant, Michael, placed a lawsuit on his desk, Rockwell barely looked at it. "Illegal evictions?" he muttered, flipping through the pages. "Who cares?" Michael hesitated. "Sir, these families, some of them had nowhere to go." Rockwell snorted, tossing the file aside. "Not my problem." Michael hesitated again. "The judge assigned to this case, Evelyn Carter, she's known for being tough. People say she doesn't back down." Rockwell laughed. "She's a judge, Michael." He waved him off. "Which means she's either corruptible or can be pressured." Michael said nothing, but he had a bad feeling about this case, a very bad feeling. And James Rockwell, for the first time in his life, was making a mistake. The first blow. A week later, the trial began. James walked in expecting an easy win, but he was wrong. Instead of an old, fragile judge, he found her, Evelyn Carter, young, sharp, unshakable. And that irritated him, so he mocked her. He thought his wealth, his influence, his arrogance would intimidate her. But he was wrong again, because James Rockwell, for all his billions, had just walked into a trap. And he was about to find out the hard way, a game he didn't know he was losing. Rockwell was still laughing under his breath when the side door of the courtroom opened. A court officer walked up to Judge Carter's bench, handing her a sealed folder. She took it without breaking eye contact with Rockwell. She opened the folder, scanned the pages inside, and then, slowly, she looked up. Her gaze, cold, calculating, final. "Mr. Rockwell," she said, her voice even but firm, "you seem to believe that money and power place you above the law." She tapped the folder. That ends today. The room froze. Rockwell's smirk vanished. For the first time in his life, James Rockwell felt true fear, and he had no idea what was coming next. James Rockwell had spent a lifetime bending the law to his will. Money had always been his weapon, a shield, a sword, and a crown. But today, for the first time, he had nothing to hide behind. Judge Evelyn Carter was not intimidated, not impressed, and certainly not afraid. And as she tapped the sealed folder on her desk, James felt an unfamiliar sensation, a loss of control. His lawyer, David Carver, leaned toward him, voice low and urgent. "Stay calm," he whispered. "We don't know what she has yet." But Rockwell wasn't calm, because he knew one thing for certain. He had too many skeletons, and if she had even one, it could all come crashing down. "Bailiff, bring in the witness." The side door creaked open, and a woman stepped forward. She was in her 40s, dressed in modest clothes, her fingers clenched tightly together. Her eyes, though, were sharp with determination. Rockwell frowned. At first, he didn't recognize her. But then she lifted her gaze, and his stomach twisted. It was her Mrs. Linda Brooks, a former tenant, one of thousands he had thrown out without a second thought. His mind raced. She had been evicted months ago. Why was she here? Then, he remembered it had been an ordinary morning when his assistant, Michael, handed him the eviction orders. James had barely skimmed them before signing. He never cared about who was getting kicked out. The Brooks family was just another name in a long list of tenants who had missed their rent. Michael had hesitated before speaking. "Sir." "The Brooks family. Spare me the sob story, Michael," James had scoffed, tapping his pen against the desk. "They should have paid their rent on time." Michael had looked uneasy. "Sir, the husband is sick, bedridden. The wife is his full-time caregiver. And their son, he's disabled." James hadn't even looked up. "Not my problem." And just like that, the Brooks family had been thrown out onto the street. Now, months later, the woman stood before him. The weight of her pain palpable. Judge Carter nodded at her. "Mrs. Brooks, you may proceed." Linda took a deep breath, gripping the microphone. "My husband died because of this man." The courtroom fell silent. Rockwell's pulse skipped. His lawyer's head snapped toward him. James felt an icy grip on his chest. "Excuse me?" he scoffed, forcing a smirk. "My husband was already ill," Linda continued. "But after the eviction, we had nowhere to go. We ended up in a shelter." Her voice broke. "It wasn't clean. He got an infection. He never recovered." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The prosecutor leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. Rockwell clenched his jaw. "You're seriously trying to blame me for that?" he scoffed. Judge Carter's gaze turned razor-sharp. "Mr. Rockwell, you forcibly evicted a dying man with nowhere to go." Her words echoed. James felt a rare flicker of unease. His lawyer stood up hastily. "Objection, Your Honor. This is an emotional argument, not legal fact." Judge Carter held up a hand. "Overruled." "Proceed, Mrs. Brooks." Linda's voice steadied. "I begged him," she whispered. "I told him my husband was too sick to move, that my son wouldn't understand why we were being thrown out. I told him we just needed a little more time." She turned, locking eyes with James. He didn't care. The weight of the moment crushed the air from the room. Even James' usual confidence cracked for a brief second, and Judge Carter saw it. That's when she delivered the final blow. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, flipping through another document, "can you confirm that your eviction notice was sudden?" Linda nodded slowly. "Yes, they gave us 3 days." Judge Carter turned to James, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Rockwell," she said smoothly, "according to official court records, the Brooks family was legally entitled to 30 days. The tension spiked. Whispers broke out in the gallery. James felt his throat tighten. The judge lifted 2 documents, placing them side by side. "One is the official eviction notice filed by your company." She tapped the first page. "The other is the one delivered to the Brooks family." James squinted at them. His lawyer stiffened beside him. Something was wrong. The dates didn't match. The official document gave 30 days. The other, only 3. Judge Carter's voice sharpened. Someone altered this eviction notice, illegally reducing the time they had to move. James' stomach dropped. The courtroom erupted into gasps. The prosecutor leaned forward like a predator. "Your Honor, this is clear evidence of fraudulent practices." Judge Carter nodded. "Yes, and we have proof." She gestured toward the bailiff. "Bring in the forensic expert." The door opened again, and a man in a suit walked in, carrying a sealed plastic bag. Inside it, clear as day, was the fraudulent eviction notice. Judge Carter lifted the document, turning it to face the courtroom. Her eyes landed on James. "Mr. Rockwell, do you recognize this document?" James felt his mouth go dry, because at the bottom of the page was his signature. His own name, scrawled and inked out a smoking gun. James' lawyer shot up from his seat. "Your Honor, my client was unaware of any alterations." "Sit down, Mr. Carver." Judge Carter cut him off, her voice final. "We're not finished." She turned back to James. "Do you deny that this is your signature?" James opened his mouth, then closed it, because he couldn't deny it. And for the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Judge Carter tapped the gavel. "Mr. Rockwell," she said, "this court takes document forgery very seriously." She leaned forward. "And I warned you. Choose your words carefully." Then, she dropped the hammer. "Bailiff, arrest him." Gasps exploded in the room. James shot up from his seat. "You can't do this. I'm James Rockwell." But two officers were already on him, gripping his arms. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped around his wrists, and as he was dragged from the courtroom, he realized something he had never felt before: fear. The clang of the iron door echoed through the small jail cell. James Rockwell sat on the metal cot, his back against the cold concrete wall. The power he once wielded effortlessly was now out of reach. And no private jets, no whiskey lounges, no boardrooms, just a 6-by-8-foot box and a bed. That felt like a slab of stone. He had lost round one. But Rockwell wasn't a man who accepted defeat. He had built an empire from nothing, crushed competitors, bought politicians, and silenced enemies. And he wasn't about to let a young judge ruin everything. Not without a fight. James' lawyer, David Carver, sat across from him in the visitation room, his expression grim. "We're in deep trouble, James." James chuckled dryly, leaning forward. "We." David ran a hand through his thinning hair. "The Brooks case is just the beginning. The prosecution is digging into more fraudulent evictions, and if they establish a pattern, they won't." James cut him off. David sighed. "James, listen to me. The jury is already against you. And Judge Carter, she's relentless. The public is calling her a hero. The media loves her. If we don't move fast, they'll make an example out of you." James smirked, tapping his fingers against the table. "Then we move faster." David frowned. "What does that mean?" James leaned in, lowering his voice. "We take her off the board." A tense silence filled the air. David's face paled. "James, are you saying what I think you're saying?" Rockwell's smirk widened. "I'm saying Judge Carter is the only thing standing between me and freedom." His voice dropped to a whisper, his words laced with ice. "And I always eliminate obstacles." David swallowed hard. "James, this is insane. If anything happens to her, the entire system will come down on you." Rockwell's eyes darkened. "Not if it looks like an accident." A beat of silence, then, slowly, David nodded. "I'll make some calls." Back at her office, Judge Evelyn Carter felt a storm brewing. The Rockwell case had made her a household name, but with that fame came something more dangerous: enemies. Her phone buzzed. It was Detective Marcus Reynolds. "Judge Carter, you need to be careful," he said immediately. Evelyn's brows furrowed. "What's going on?" Marcus hesitated. "We intercepted a call from Rockwell's lawyer to an unknown number. The conversation was vague, but they're planning something." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you saying he's trying to come after me?" Marcus exhaled sharply. "We can't prove anything yet, but I don't like this. He's dangerous, Judge. He's desperate. And desperate men make reckless decisions." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She had dealt with criminals before, but Rockwell was different. He wasn't just a man with money. He was a man who thought he was untouchable, and now he was trapped, which meant he was at his most dangerous. That night, Evelyn drove home, her mind racing. She had spent her entire career upholding the law, but this was different. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was war. And wars weren't won by playing defense. As she stepped into her apartment, she felt something off. The air felt heavy. The lights flickered. Her heartbeat quickened. Slowly, she reached for her gun. The one she had never needed until now. A single sheet of paper sat on her kitchen counter. No words. Just an X, drawn in thick, black ink. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Someone had been here. Someone had gotten past security, and they had left her a message. Meanwhile, in the darkest corners of the city, a black SUV pulled into an abandoned warehouse. Inside, two men sat across from each. Other point one was Victor Shaw, a man with secrets of his own. The other was a hired killer. A thick envelope of cash was slid across the table. Judge Carter, the hitman said, his voice devoid of emotion. Eliminate her. Victor stared at the money, his jaw tightening. He had done shady things in the past. But this was different. Rockwell wants her gone, he asked. The hitman nodded. He says she's the only thing in his way. Victor hesitated. A decade ago, he would have taken the job without question. But now, something nagged at him. Evelyn Carter had once saved him when no one else would, and if he took this job, there would be no going back. Victor slowly pushed the envelope back across the table. Tell Rockwell I don't kill people for sport. The hitman's eyes darkened. You sure about that? Victor nodded. Yeah, I'm sure. The hitman stared at him for a long second. Then, without another word, he got up and walked out. Victor let out a slow breath. He had just made an enemy of a very powerful man. And now, it was only a matter of time before Rockwell sent someone else. Back at her apartment, Evelyn's phone buzzed. It was Detective Reynolds. Judge, we have a problem. Evelyn gripped the phone. What is it? Marcus's voice was tight. We just got a report. Rockwell put out a contract on you. Evelyn went still. A hit? Yeah, but here's the catch. Someone turned it down. Someone who knows you. Evelyn's mind raced. Who? And why? Marcus's voice hardened. You need to lay low, Judge. Rockwell just changed the game. And from now on, his voice dropped. This isn't just about the courtroom anymore. The war between Judge Evelyn Carter and James Rockwell had escalated beyond the courtroom. What started as a fraud trial had turned into a game of survival, where one wrong move could mean death. Evelyn had always known that justice came at a price, but now she was beginning to wonder, was she willing to pay it? Evelyn sat in a secure safe house, her fingers drumming against the table. Across from her, Detective Marcus Reynolds was going over the new intel. Rockwell isn't stopping. We confirmed that he put out a hit on you. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Do we know who turned it down? Marcus hesitated. Victor Shaw. The name sent a chill down her spine. She hadn't seen him in years, and yet here he was, protecting her instead of taking the money. Why? She asked. Marcus shrugged. I don't know. Maybe he's grown a conscience. Maybe he's playing his own game. Either way, it's buying us time. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice firm. Then we used that time wisely. She placed a thick folder on the table. Inside were bank statements, fraudulent transactions, and offshore accounts. Proof that James Rockwell wasn't just a fraudster, but a criminal mastermind. This is enough to bury him, she said. Marcus scanned the documents, his face unreadable. Where did you get this? Evelyn's jaw tightened. Michael Reynolds gave it to me before he went into witness protection. He had access to everything Rockwell tried to hide. Marcus let out a low whistle. This is a kill shot, Carter. If we present this in court, he's done. Evelyn nodded. Then let's end this. Back in his prison cell, James Rockwell's mind was racing. He had lost control. The case was falling apart. Evelyn had outmaneuvered him. And now, even Victor Shaw had turned against him. His lawyer, David Carver, sat across from him in the visitation room, looking nervous. James, we have a problem. James gritted his teeth. When don't we? David slid a folder across the table. James picked it up and scanned the papers inside. Then his blood ran cold. It was the financial evidence. The same documents he had spent years keeping hidden. Bank transactions, shell companies, offshore accounts, it was all there. Where did they get this? James hissed. David hesitated. Michael Reynolds. He flipped before going into witness protection. James slammed his fist on the table. That little traitor, David cut him off. It's worse than that. Carter and Reynolds are planning to present this in court tomorrow. James felt a slow rage building inside him. He had two choices: sit back and let them win, or make a final move. His voice was ice cold when he spoke. If we can't stop the evidence, he leaned in, his eyes burning with fury. Then we stop Carter. David's face paled. James, no more playing games, David. I don't care what it takes. I want her gone. David swallowed hard. I'll make some calls. That night, Evelyn was working late in the courthouse. The safe house felt too small, too much like a prison. She needed to clear her head. The building was empty, save for a few security guards and Detective Reynolds, who was keeping an eye on her. The clock read 1:12 a.m. She was about to pack up when her phone buzzed a message. Unknown number. Check outside. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She walked to the window and parted the blinds. A black SUV sat outside the courthouse, its engine idling. Her breath caught. Something was wrong then. The lights inside the courthouse cut out. Pitch black, silence. Evelyn froze. The air felt electric, charged with the kind of danger you could feel in your bones. Then, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate. Someone was inside the building. Evelyn grabbed her gun. Reynolds, she whispered urgently. No response. Her pulse pounded. Had they gotten to him? Then, a bullet shattered the glass. Evelyn dropped to the floor, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. Shadows moved in the hallway. This wasn't a random break-in. This was an execution. James Rockwell had sent killers to take her out before the trial. Evelyn crawled toward her desk, trying to reach the panic button under the table. But before she could press it, a figure appeared in the doorway. Gun raised, finger on the trigger. Evelyn braced for the shot. But before it could fire, a gunshot rang out. Not from the attacker, from behind him. The man stumbled forward, clutching his chest, and standing in the hallway, smoke rising from the barrel of his gun, was Victor Shaw. Evelyn stared in shock. Victor lowered his gun, stepping over the dead man's body. "You all right, Judge?" he asked, his voice calm. Evelyn swallowed hard. "What the hell are you doing here?" Victor smirked. "Saving your life, apparently." Evelyn gritted her teeth. "Why?" Victor sighed, slipping his gun back into his jacket. "Because Rockwell sent someone after me, too." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "So this isn't just about me." Victor shook his head. "No. Rockwell's cleaning house. He knows he's losing." Evelyn exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. "Then we finish this?" Victor nodded. "Yeah. And I think I know exactly how to do that." As sirens wailed in the distance, Evelyn realized tomorrow wouldn't just be about winning the trial. It would be about ending James Rockwell's reign of terror once and for all. And this time, she wasn't playing by the rules anymore. The night was heavy with the threat of danger, but Judge Evelyn Carter stood tall, determined as ever. Every nerve in her body was on edge, but the battle had gone beyond just fighting for justice. Now, it was about survival. She had played by the rules for so long, but James Rockwell had no intention of abiding by anything except his own twisted will. Now, it was time for Evelyn to play hardball. The morning light filtered into the courthouse, but it didn't bring warmth. The halls were cold and silent, as if holding its breath for the final act to unfold. Evelyn Carter was already in her office, the papers and evidence spread before her, and the final blow ready to be dealt. Her heart pounded, but her resolve was clear. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. Victor Shaw had warned her. The threats were escalating. Her safe house had been attacked. They had come after her again, but she had survived. This wasn't just a courtroom battle. It was a full-fledged war. And Evelyn wasn't about to lose. As the courtroom doors opened, Evelyn felt the air shift. The room filled with murmurs, the staring eyes of the gallery, the press in the back, all were focused on one thing. The case that had gripped the nation's attention. James Rockwell, the billionaire tycoon, stood in front of her once again, no longer the untouchable mogul in his $1,000 suits. Now, he wore the prison jumpsuit, his hands cuffed, his arrogance still unbroken. His eyes met hers with that same sneer, but Evelyn knew that today it would be different. Today, the power he had wielded for so long was slipping from his grasp. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and the gallery stood. Evelyn did as well, her eyes never leaving Rockwell. He thought he had one. But today, the rules were different. Today, the game was hers. She had the final piece of evidence, proof that James Rockwell was not just a criminal mastermind involved in fraud and illegal evictions, but a man who had built an empire on lies and betrayal. "Mr. Rockwell," Evelyn began, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You stand here today because you thought you were above the law. You thought you could crush people, destroy lives, and still walk away untouched." She paused, allowing her words to sink in, her gaze unwavering. "Not anymore," she continued, her tone steely. "Today, justice is finally catching up to you." As the prosecutor stood to present the evidence, more documents, more testimony, James's face started to twist with panic. The courtroom had gone from stunned silence to a roar of gasps and whispers as the details of his illegal activities flooded in. The forged documents, the bribes, the offshore accounts, everything came to light. Then, Evelyn stood up once again, her final piece of evidence in her hand. "Mr. Rockwell," she said coldly, "I now present to the court the final piece of evidence that seals your fate. You thought you could hide your crimes, but you were wrong." As she opened the folder, a whisper spread through the room like wildfire. Inside were bank records, offshore accounts, and connections to violent criminal organizations that James Rockwell had sheltered under his empire. The courtroom was stunned. This wasn't just about illegal evictions. This was about a man who had manipulated the system for years, a man who had used his power and money to cover up the most heinous crimes. Rockwell's smug expression faltered as the papers were laid before the court. His jaw tightened, his face going white. It was the moment of reckoning. "Where did you get this?" James spat, his voice thick with rage and disbelief. Evelyn didn't flinch. "From someone you used to trust," she said with an icy smile. For the first time in his life, James Rockwell felt powerless. The world he had built, the empire that had allowed him to get away with everything, was crumbling. Every illegal move, every piece of corruption, had been exposed for the world to see. "You know who I am," he hissed, struggling against the guards. "I know exactly who you are," Evelyn replied, her voice unwavering. "And today, you will answer for everything." The courtroom was in chaos. Rockwell's lawyer tried to object, but Evelyn was beyond reproach. The final verdict had been handed down. James Rockwell was going to be sentenced to life in prison, his assets seized, his empire destroyed. As the bailiff called for the arrest, Evelyn slammed her gavel down with a finality that echoed through the room. "Take him away," she ordered. James struggled, but the officers were quick to subdue him. The billionaire tycoon, the man who thought he was invincible, was now just another criminal, heading to prison. His cries of anger echoed, but no one paid attention. He had lost it all. The courtroom erupted into applause, but Evelyn didn't celebrate. She had done her job. Justice had been served. After the trial, as the dust settled, Evelyn stood by the courthouse steps, her mind already racing toward the next steps. She had won, but as she glanced around, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over. In the distance, a black SUV rolled past the courthouse, its tinted windows hiding the face of the driver. Victor Shaw was still in the game, and she wasn't sure if she could trust him fully. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but I still have eyes on you. Watch your back." Her pulse quickened, but Evelyn wasn't afraid. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. The war against James Rockwell was over, but the battle for her own future was just beginning. She had destroyed Rockwell's empire, but Evelyn Carter knew that no one ever truly wins. In this world of power, corruption, and deceit, there was always someone waiting for their chance to strike. And Evelyn would be ready for whatever came next. Months later, after the trial, the dust had settled. Rockwell was behind bars, his empire reduced to rubble. But Evelyn Carter had made a name for herself, not just as a judge, but as someone who would fight for what was right, no matter the cost. Her office was busy as usual, filled with files and paperwork, but there was a calmness to it now. She had been through the fire, and she had emerged stronger than ever. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. Victor Shaw. She smiled, a knowing smile. She had made it through, and so had he. The game had changed, but the rules were still the same. They were still players in this world, but now they were on the same side. And for once, Evelyn knew that justice had truly been served. The story of Judge Evelyn Carter and billionaire James Rockwell and the theme of justice prevailing over corruption. Throughout the intense courtroom battle, Evelyn's unwavering dedication to doing what's right ultimately dismantles Rockwell's empire, exposing his illegal activities and bringing him to justice. Despite Rockwell's attempts to manipulate and intimidate, Evelyn's intelligence, integrity, and courage ensure that he faces the consequences of his actions. The story also explores the personal sacrifices Evelyn makes in her pursuit of justice, including threats to her life and the fear of losing everything. In the end, she emerges victorious, though the journey proves that standing up for the greater good is never without its challenges. The closure of Rockwell's empire signifies not just the end of one man's reign of power, but the ongoing struggle for justice in a world often dominated by wealth and influence. Don't miss out on more exciting content. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and leave a comment below with your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And to stay updated with all our latest videos, be sure to subscribe and press the bell icon so you never miss a post. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to sharing more with you.